Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Illuminati. The man who rules the world takes on the head of the global elite in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes' Illuminati on Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. One of my viewers wanted me to talk about the effects of the migrant crisis on New York City. And the effects of the migrant crisis have had a major impact on the quality of life in New York City, leading to the city going into a major state of decline that looks like it's going to get progressively worse now that many of the migrants are being kicked out of the shelter system because they have met the 60-day limit for their stay in many of the hotels throughout the city.
Some of the migrants who have been living in city shelters were evicted today.
They're part of the first wave of families with children impacted by the city's 60-day rule. CBS 2's Natalie Dudridge spoke to asylum seekers at the Row Hotel in Midtown.
Despite being 8 months pregnant, Maria Cuero's 60-day shelter limit has come to an end. She says, "We don't want to live like this. We'd like stability because of the baby, get a job, which is the hardest thing." Cuero is one of 40 asylum-seeking families forced to move on or reapply after their 2 months was up. Part of a strategy the city hoped would free up shelter space for the hundreds of new migrants arriving weekly.
And my teams have moved heaven and earth to work with families to help them to identify their next steps.
But Angel Blanco, also from Venezuela, tells us 60 days wasn't enough time to find work and a home for he and his son. So he must reapply at the Roosevelt Hotel Processing Center.
To kick families out of shelter in the middle of wintertime, to displace kids from their school in the middle of the school year is honestly one of the cruelest things.
City Controller Brad Lander questions the city's policy and calls it poorly communicated and executed.
We are launching an investigation under the powers granted to the Controller's office.
City officials responded they're working to keep families who reapply to shelters near their children's school.
Prioritize their kids that are in elementary school to be able to stay in the same school with hotel placements in the district nearest to that school. Other families have already been reticketed to be reunited with friends and family.
Julie from Haiti tells us in French she's one of the lucky ones. After being evicted, a friend in Maryland invited her family to stay with them. But John from Colombia and his family hauled their luggage to the Roosevelt Hotel after being evicted from the Row. They still don't know where they'll go. The Adams administration said they will not let them sleep on the street and have been working with families to place them in temporary housing for an additional 60 days. In Midtown, Natalie Dudridge, CBS 2 News.
Now, the migrant crisis here in New York City has gotten progressively worse since it started way back in 2021. Now, this whole migrant crisis basically started when New York Mayor Eric Adams decided that he wanted to virtue signal and create a covert contract with higher level politicians like New York Governor Kathy Hochul and President Joe Biden, and hoped that by towing the party line to virtue signal that he was going to maintain their policies, that he would hopefully get support from higher up members in the Blue Party. Now, this was the covert contract that Eric Adams made in New Year's Eve in 2021 when he was the mayor-elect, and sadly that contract has not been fulfilled over the course of 2022 when Texas Governor Greg Abbott began sending migrants up to New York City to test the validity of the sanctuary city law that Eric Adams co-signed in an effort to virtue signal to those higher up politicians like Governor Kathy Hochul and President Joe Biden, and hoped that this virtue signal would allow him to show that he was not racist like former President Donald Trump, who said that he wanted to build a wall to set a boundary between American citizens and the migrants, but Eric Adams wanted to co-sign that policy established by Bill de Blasio and Andrew Cuomo, again to be able to virtue signal, hoping that this would lead to him being offered a job in the 2024 Joe Biden presidential campaign as a part of the cabinet if Joe Biden were elected. However, as migrants began being sent up to New York City, Eric Adams boldly said that he would continue to support the policy and even went to meet migrants at the Port Authority bus station here in New York City. And as he met the migrants, he was shaking their hands, giving them care packages, and hoping that this whole deal would just be a handful of migrants, but quickly found himself to be overwhelmed by 30,000 migrants by March of 2023. And as he became overwhelmed, he hoped to try to stem the flow of migrants by a series of approaches, which started first with an approach to try to discourage migrants from coming to New York City by going down to the border and hoping to hand out flyers to dissuade them from coming to the city. However, that was just a complete waste of time because most of the migrants could not read or write in any language, including the one in their home countries, due to the education system being one you have to buy in many of those countries. And that was one of the reasons why that whole campaign failed. And after that campaign failed, Eric Adams then decided to try to find other ways to dissuade the migrants over the summer of 2023 by going to create policies like the policy of not dropping the migrants off in front of the intake center he created out of the defunct Roosevelt Hotel. And when that didn't work, what he tried to do was create another policy over the summer of 2023, where he said that the migrants would have a 60-day stay inside of the hotels that they were staying in, and they would have to find other accommodations. And that whole policy wasn't really put into place until recently. Now, Eric Adams, what he's trying to do with this whole policy is trying to dissuade migrants from coming to the city, because now we have over 100,000 migrants here in New York City, and city services have been completely overwhelmed to the point where we've had 3 rounds of budget cuts of city services as related to taking care of everyday New Yorkers, and that has basically led to a decline in the quality of life for New Yorkers, and it's led to a major decline in the quality of life because individuals in the city, citizens, cannot get services from the taxes they pay for, 1, and 2, most of the city services have been directed, most of the resources have been directed towards migrants, and that has led to the start of a decline in the quality of life, because areas like Madison Avenue in Midtown Manhattan, I remember about 15 years ago, I used to shop there regularly. I mean, this is the area where they had the most high-end stores, where the Roosevelt Hotel is, and you had stores like Brooks Brothers, Charles Turwitt, you had J. Crew, you had Ann Taylor, but all of those stores basically closed due to the pandemic, and it's basically turned into the prime real estate has turned into a wasteland, and that whole area has gone into a major state of decline. And this is East Side Midtown Manhattan, very close to Grand Central Station, and it's looking as seedy as Times Square back in the 70s and the 80s, and it's all due to Eric Adams' policies, which are getting progressively worse, because under his 60-day rule, what's happening now is many of those migrants who came back in 2022 have basically ended their whole time in the city's system, and as those individuals have ended their time in the system, they are being told that they have to leave these hotels that they're staying in. And what that does is it's starting to double the homeless population here in New York City, which was already 100,000 New Yorkers, many of them veterans who served this country in combat, and many of them foundational Black Americans who have fallen through the cracks due to the racism of city services. And those individuals have been pushed to the back of the line further by the Adams administration. And now that the migrants have basically served their political purpose as related to the subtle politics transpiring around us, what is happening now is the Adams administration is basically looking to passively say that they've met the quota for the time, and aggressively looking to stop being able to care for them because it's just so overwhelming. But what's happening now as a result is we're starting to see this political divide between the Blue Party and the Adams administration, and many of these white male and white female politicians, what they are doing is basically starting to put distance between themselves and Eric Adams and make him into the bad guy who's going to take the fall for all of these dysfunctional policies. And basically, it's all Eric Adams' fault because he could not see the subtle politics transpiring around him. And because Eric Adams couldn't see the subtle politics transpiring around him in this political chess game, he's still out here thinking he's got some hope, holding up that pink card and hoping that this Candyland game will be a winner for him. But many of his own members of the Blue Party in the city council and the Manhattan Borough president, they see the chess game, and many of them, what they're looking to do is put distance between themselves and the Cream of Wheat Man, because they know that the Cream of Wheat Man is basically cooked politically, because he was the one who came out here and said that the migrant crisis would destroy New York City. And what they want to do is see that these people are being evicted from these hotels as a result of his policy. And what they want to do is pivot and make it like they weren't a part of these policies and make Eric Adams the one who has to be the fall guy for all of the migrant mess. And this is done by design because many of these white and non-black politicians see that the Cream of Wheat Man is basically cooked at this point. And now that they see that his approval rating is at 28%, they see an opportunity opening up for themselves to be able to put that distance between themselves and Eric Adams and his so-called cruel policies as related to kicking many of these migrants out. And they want to make it look like they are sympathetic to the migrants. And as they do this, the mainstream media paints these people as Hispanic, whereas when there was a major migrant crisis and people were sleeping in the street, they focused mostly on black faces. So this whole game basically shows how the whole narrative now is being designed to demonize the black man as incompetent, and he is truly incompetent because he didn't see the subtle politics transpiring around him in this political chess game. And Eric Adams basically is at a point where people basically have seen him as the one who created this migrant crisis, and he made this migrant crisis because he just couldn't see how he was just a political pawn trying to toe a party line. But now the party is turning on him in this election year, and they're turning on him in this election year for the president, and they're also turning on him because they know 2025 is right around the corner, and many people like the Manhattan Borough president wants that job of becoming the next mayor, and what they want to do is try to make it look like they were more humane than Eric Adams, the evil black man who has created these very unfair and insensitive policies as related to their pivoted position, because many of these people weren't saying this before until they found out Eric Adams' approval rating was at 28%. And now they have a completely different viewpoint, and what they're doing now is trying to pivot and make it look like they weren't down, and that's always been the plan. And if you noticed it, it was always the plan from the beginning, because New York Governor Kathy Hochul started putting distance between herself and Eric Adams, and we also saw Joe Biden never saying a single word about this migrant crisis. No, what they wanted to do was make it all about making the black man be the face of incompetence and the face of failure, and making it like he was the one who basically destroyed the quality of life in New York City. And I would have to say his policies basically did, because he did double the homeless population here in New York City, because with many of these migrants being kicked out on the street after 60 days, what we're going to have is a doubling of the homeless population. 1, 2, we're going to have lots of people out here panhandling and begging and soliciting, because they're not going to be able to get any city services anymore. And 3, we're going to possibly have an increase in crime as related to many of these individuals who cannot legally work anywhere because they cannot get their working papers. And we're going to see, again, most of these individuals out here, and it's all due to the pride of Eric Adams as related to believing in the Blue Party. But the Blue Party is showing how hypocritical it is, because now they want to make it look like it was the black politicians who were out here behind these policies, when it was actually them just following orders. And as they followed these orders, it basically was the party that came up with this. And they want to make the whole face of failure for the sanctuary cities, black people. And that's the state of New York right now, which is basically chaotic. I mean, we have some of the best real estate turned into a sewer by incompetent politicians, and we have the quality of life in a very bad place as related to New York, because New York has turned into a very squalid place, because this is what happens when you have individuals who come to the country illegally in the country, and you don't have the space to take care of them. And you have the travel and tourism here, which is in bad shape, because you can't get a hotel room here in New York City. No, you can't get a hotel room as related to anything, because migrants are staying in most of the hotels. And this is all a mess made by Eric Adams, and sadly, it's his face that's the one of all of this complete disaster. And he says that the migrant crisis would destroy New York City. Well, we wouldn't have had a migrant crisis if Eric Adams hadn't written a check with his mouth that his ass couldn't cash. And we wouldn't have a migrant crisis here in New York City if he hadn't gone out here looking to spite Donald Trump. And for all of his efforts to spite Donald Trump, he wants to blame Texas Governor Greg Abbott for looking to see that this policy would be one that was implemented according to city and state law. But you won't see Eric Adams speaking against the party that created most of these policies. Or he's criticized Joe Biden, but it was those state and local politicians that are mostly black that signed on for this deal, and they were the ones who wrote these policies, not understanding the subtle politics transpiring around them in this political chess game. And that political chess game was all about making it where black people were the face of incompetence, and that's what's happened here as related to the entire migrant crisis, because as people color are being evicted. They want it to look like the black man is the bad guy for creating this policy that's kicking people out of these hotels in the dead of winter. However, many of those people, they came here illegally and they signed on for this deal to travel to these cities. And the whole thing is they didn't have to travel because they could have just stayed right where they were and let ICE do its job, because had ICE been allowed to do their job, many of these people would not be in this situation, one, and two, they wouldn't be in this situation if many of these blue politicians had let the federal government do its job, but they didn't want the federal government to do its job because ICE was racist, and because they believed ICE was racist, they believed they could do a better job. And it's clear that the cities all in these blue states are not equipped to be able to deal with migrants or be able to process migrants. And this is only a job that the federal government, and only the federal government can do this job. And we need to let the federal government do its job in order to maintain a quality of life in the cities where we're seeing crime go up because migrants are getting arrested. And for some reason, I'm seeing migrants getting cars. I'm hearing this rumor, and I don't see how you can get a car without a driver's license or anything from the DMV to register the vehicle. But they are saying some of them are buying vehicles illegally. And this is creating a dangerous safety issue, because if one of these individuals gets into an accident, there's nobody to hold these individuals accountable unless you sue the city, because it's all the city's fault. These individuals are running around. And this whole situation is basically the result of what happens when people go out here and virtue signal, trying to say that they're not racist, but then want to go back and now want to implement what are deemed to be racist policies to let individuals have boundaries as related to this situation, not understanding the reason why people like Donald Trump were proposing boundaries was because they wanted to make the nation safe as related to, one, national security, and two, find a way to vet many of these individuals so that we know who's coming into the country. And what's happening now with New York City is we've got a city in chaos with a leader who is completely overwhelmed, a leader whose head is not really in the game, and he's desperate to find any way to try to stem the flow of migrants. And the easiest way to do this is for Eric Adams and many of these black members of the Blue Party to take the L and repeal these policies such as the Sanctuary City law and the Sanctuary State law. I mean, this is the only way out, just like it was with Prohibition in the 1920s, where America had to take the L on Prohibition when organized crime was basically turning the entire nation into a war zone. They realized that they weren't stopping anyone from drinking. All they were doing was taking things underground, and the only way to deal with this whole situation was to concede that this policy wasn't working, take that L, and move on. And the only way to deal with this migrant crisis is for many of these politicians to just take the L, because the only way it's going to work is if you take the L, but these guys fear losing the next election, and that's why they're scrambling like rats to get away from Eric Adams, when it was all of them who supported these policies as they were looking to show how they weren't Donald Trump. But the only thing that's happening is you're proving Donald Trump's point to be true. And sadly, it is true, because we have a national security issue. And with the whole situation with the migrant crisis, only two things can solve it. One, states repealing the sanctuary city laws, which are unconstitutional, because what they do is go out here and are trying to interfere in federal affairs. And we have to also repeal these laws and make sure that we let the federal government and ICE do their job. That's the only way you solve this migrant crisis, because migrants need to be vetted and processed by ICE. It needs to be ICE's job that is the main thing with this whole situation, and that's why the state of New York feels more like the 70s and the 80s, and the city is turning into a greater hellhole under the Adams administration. But this is done by design, because with white supremacy, what they want to do with many of these black bootleg politicians, like the bootleg from Brooklyn, is show how incompetent they are in an effort to be able to traumatize people so they'll never elect another black politician and will never get an opportunity at another black mayor or a black president like Barack Obama. What they want to do is traumatize people by bringing up these incompetent bootlicks, and then as these incompetent bootlicks fail in the job, what they want to do is use this as a narrative to show black incompetence when there's actual black excellence out there. And with black excellence, you would have had somebody who would have basically said, since this is a federal matter, I'm turning the buses around, or I'm going to put them on another bus and send them back, because this is a federal matter, and it's the job of ICE to deal with this situation in Homeland Security. That is what a competent and qualified individual would have said. They would have said, this is going to be federal matters, but Eric Adams didn't say that, and he's basically turned the quality of life in New York to the place where it is in the 70s and the 80s, and he's turned New York from the Big Apple into one big sewer. Now, this was a video requested by a viewer, and he didn't send me a Cash App, but when people request videos, you can send me a donation to the Cash App or the PayPal by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to pick up some of my positive black fiction on the SJS Direct Imprint, you can find those books on Amazon.com by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, subscribe.
Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, John Haynes, the man with nothing to lose. The man who rules the world runs into the irresistible force of a man with nothing to lose in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get the regular and variant editions of John Haynes, the man with nothing to lose on Amazon.com today.
Support black-owned and black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.